All right, welcome to PoE 2, everyone. Let's get into it. We're talking today about performance issues, how to troubleshoot performance issues, how to get the most FPS, frames per second, how to make the game look good, etc., etc. Let's get into it. So the first thing we have to talk about at length is this graph up here on the top right. Okay, this graph, if you press F1 on your keyboard, it appears. So hit F1, make sure you've got this graph up. This is an actual performance monitor for the game that GGG has put into the game. Again, press F1, put it up on your screen. You're gonna wanna get to know this if you're having any kind of performance issues, even if you're not having performance issues, you wanna know about this. And this is gonna be like one of the main focuses of what we're gonna discuss today in order to improve our performance and figure out what settings we actually need to change. Because I actually wanna start with the first point. My first point is as follows. If we go into the options menu here and we look at, for example, the graphics settings options. Now, if you go out on YouTube and Google and you search, like, how do I improve my performance? I'm having performance problems. Like, I just watched a pretty long video on it. And basically what the person did, I may link the video down below possibly. They basically went through, it was a good video. It was a good video and it helped a lot of people. You can tell in the comments, it helped people. But basically all it did is it went through every possible setting here that you can set. And it basically just changed it from high to low. It took like the highest possible setting you can do and put it on the lowest possible setting you can do. And big surprise, you know, it helped some people with some of their performance. If you want to just improve your performance, you can just do that and move on. But that's not what I recommend. One of the common themes on my channel is I'm going to kind of try to teach you how to actually empower yourself to not have to rely on other guides and things like that. And you know what to do and what to look for. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to figure out how to diagnose the problems that we're actually having, again, using this graph up here on the top right. So that way we don't have to just go through and change all these to the lowest possible settings when it may not even actually make any difference whatsoever to our FPS. So let's go ahead and get into it and figure out how to start troubleshooting our specific issues that we're having. Okay, so let me just start by pointing out I'm on an NVIDIA GeForce RTX 2080. This is basically a good, solid graphics card. It seems to play the game well. I'm actually using GeForce Now. It's a cloud service, and on the computer that I'm on right now, it's using a RTX 2080. It doesn't tell me what CPU I have, but it doesn't really matter, and we'll get into that in a second. All right, so now let's go ahead and focus on this big old graph looking thing on the top right. Let's start one by one explaining what each of these things are. Okay, so let's go through this graph real quick and explain what each thing means. So on the top left of the graph, it says the frame. This is our frames that we're getting. So it says 31 ms and 3132 FPS. Okay, and you can see these two values, they're related and they both kind of change at the same time. As the MS goes up, the FPS goes down. As the MS goes down, the FPS goes up. Everyone knows FPS. This is the frames per second that we're getting. Okay, MS, this is milliseconds. This is how many milliseconds it's taking to generate each frame. So if it takes, for example, let's say it takes 100 milliseconds to generate a frame, you're going to get 10 frames per second. There's 1,000 milliseconds in a second, so 100. And you can see it's kind of times 3. So 33 would be exactly 3 times that. 100 milliseconds, you get 10 frames per second. 33 milliseconds, you get basically exactly 30 frames per second. And that's exactly what we're seeing. Now, I'm in the Act 3 town here. And towns are places where you have run into some performance issues. Again, we're going to get into that here in a second. But I have a relatively constant, stable performance. All right, so let's start by talking about these colored bars on the bottom of the graph. So first we have CPU, and we see, sorry, it's maybe a tiny bit blurry text because I'm doing the cloud gaming on the GeForce Now, but I think you can pretty much read it. So it says CPU, 30 to 40 milliseconds. And one thing you'll notice here is each of these bars has like a full, it can be filled. So the CPU has a full red bar, the GPU has a blue bar, but it's not filled up. Network has a green bar, not filled up. Memory has a blue bar, not filled up. VRAM has a orangish bar, not filled up all the way. The only bar that's filled up all the way is the CPU bar. Already, we're troubleshooting our possible performance issues here, because what this means right off the gate, if whatever bar is like the most full is essentially where you're having your problem. Let's dive in a little deeper. If we look at the CPU, it says it's 36 milliseconds. So basically what this means is our CPU and our GPU are both getting assigned work that they have to do, okay? Our CPU is getting the work done at a rate of, it takes it basically 30, 40, 50 milliseconds to get the work done. The work that's being sent to our GPU, it takes the GPU 8 milliseconds to get the work done that it needs to do. So it's taking our CPU like 4 or 5 times longer to get its work done than it takes our GPU to get its work done. And thus, in order to generate our frames, the GPU, it finishes in 8 milliseconds, but it takes the CPU 30 milliseconds to finish getting that frame ready to put on the screen. What this means is the GPU is essentially idling for the other 30 seconds. It did all its work and it has nothing to do, and it's literally waiting for the CPU to finish in order to actually generate the frame to the screen. So this is really, really, really important. And if you wanted to summarize this video in one sentence, it's the following. Figure out which of all of these different components and parts is bottlenecking your performance in your game. Which one is causing the problems? Which one is it's called bottlenecking. When the GPU is sitting waiting for the CPU is bottlenecking your performance. And I think this is going to be a common problem that most people are going to have in Path of Exile, is they're going to buy an amazing GPU and they're going to say, my work is done. I upgraded my GPU, my work is done. I should be playing the game at 10,000 frames per second. But the problem is, if you press F1, look at this graph and see what it's telling you, because my guess is, chances are, your GPU has a really low MS and your CPU has a full red bar. This is going to be the most common problem I think people are going to run into. And no matter what you do for your GPU, no matter what settings you change, if we go in here and we change these graphic settings, any of these graphic settings that only helps our GPU run faster is not going to change our performance because we're CPU bottlenecked. Okay. Final note on this. Okay. If we look at our CPU, so we've diagnosed, like, this machine that I'm using on GeForce Now, we've diagnosed the problem. The problem is the CPU on this machine. So if I want to increase my performance, I have basically two choices. I either have to get a new CPU that's faster and is going to run the game better, or I have to find settings that are going to influence my CPU, which I'm sorry to tell you, I don't think there's like a whole lot of settings that actually influence the CPU dramatically. Let me make one final comment point here on the CPU. Look at the MS of the CPU and watch the MS of how the frames are being generated. The CPU MS is always equal to this overall MS of our frames being generated. Why is that? It's because the CPU is our bottleneck. No matter what changes I make to this GPU 8 milliseconds, it's not going to really have any tangible difference. I'm not going to notice any difference in my frames per second. So any settings I change here, if it basically doesn't actually help my CPU, if it only helps what's happening on the GPU, it will not affect my performance. So let's now talk about a couple other things. Network. Okay, this is your actual network connection. This is how long it's taking to get the signals back and forth from the GGG servers. Okay. You probably will have an idea. You can watch this graph when you're playing. If you notice the network is going absolutely crazy, this is the green line on the chart. If you notice it's going absolutely crazy, you probably know if you have a bad internet connection. Number one thing you can do if you're having a bad internet connection and that's causing a lot of problems, my recommendation, number one thing you can do is plug your computer directly into your router. I will basically never play a game ever again that's not plugged directly into the router. That's the best possible thing you can do. There are also sometimes network related settings. I'm going to let you look into that. If you guys want even more detail than I'm going into already in this video, which is a very detailed video on troubleshooting individual factors, let me know in the comments and I'll think about it. Give the video a like and I'll think about making a follow-up to this, and you can say some of the issues you're having. All right, next we've got memory up on the top right. I believe this is the RAM usage. It says it's using 2 gigabytes of RAM. Okay, probably it's going to be no big deal for you. I think most people aren't going to have a problem. Just open an F1 and you monitor these values and see if they ever go crazy. If you have like a ton of crap open on your computer that's using up all your RAM, maybe you could run into problems. Just close everything. You should be fine. Okay, next we have VRAM. You can see the VRAM, it says it's using 4.8 gigabytes. This should be the VRAM on your graphics cards. I'm not an absolute world expert authority on everything I'm talking about, but I believe everything I'm saying is correct. If you notice any problems, just feel free to shout it out in the comments, but I believe this is the VRAM on your graphics card. Let's go ahead and look at this one for a second. So VRAM, it says it's using 4.8 gigabytes. Again, if we go through every graphical setting here and start messing with settings, it's probably not going to do any really change to the VRAM. The only thing that's basically going to change this is if you go into detail settings, you have texture quality. Let's read what GGG says. If you read through all this, it basically says this should only change, you should only have to change it on old GPU with low amounts of memory. That should be your VRAM. So let's actually change this and let's see what happens on the graph. Right now, we've got the high texture quality. It's using about 5 gigs of VRAM. If we change it to medium, okay, and then we wait a second. All right, now look what's happened to our graph, okay? Basically the main difference that happened is our VRAM, the usage went all the way down to 2 gigabytes. So, for example, you're troubleshooting your issue. How much VRAM do you have on your graphics card? Look at this chart. See where the VRAM graph is on your chart. And basically, you've only got two choices. You've got either medium or you've got high. Medium's going to use, as you can see, around 2 gigs of VRAM. So if you have, basically, if you have an older card that has like 3 gigabytes of VRAM, you're going to play on medium. If you have, enough with some wiggle room, you probably have 8 gigs of VRAM or maybe 12 on your card, then you're going to switch it back to high, you're going to be fine. This is going to have a huge performance impact if it becomes your bottleneck that you're dealing with. So for example, if I had the game launch right now in a 3 gig VRAM graphics card and I set it to high, you would notice probably a very tangible performance hit if that happened. Okay. Again, this is where on YouTube, if you go and everybody tells you to just set all your settings to low, may not really have much of a difference because this is only really going to affect the VRAM. In fact, if you look at the text, let's look at the last line. They say, if changing the setting doesn't have an immediate effect on your FPS, leave it on high. This is one of the key points I want to make in this video. You need to figure out what is your bottleneck, and you don't need to turn settings down if they're not affecting your FPS. Texture quality affects how much VRAM is used. It's not going to really have... So do exactly what they say. You can read through what all these settings do. Again, if you want a more detailed tutorial from me, let me know in the comments. I could even go through each one of these and talk about like the performance hit and things like that. Okay, finally, let's talk about drive in the graph. So you can see the drive isn't being used. This is basically your hard drive, your SSD, your NVMe SSD, and it's basically showing you when things are having to be loaded from the drive into the game. And you'll notice in the little graph where there's the blue line and the green line and the white line, you'll notice every once in a while you get that light blue line spikes, and you'll notice the drive has 1 megabyte per second too. Like it just kind of happened a little bit there, but not much. Probably people are joining and entering and exiting out of the town. And when that happens, you have to go like load some MTXs that these people have. Once again, all you can really do here is basically monitor it. So we had a little spike there of the drive. It means the drive had to work a little bit. You'll notice it didn't have any effect on my frames. So this is how we diagnose it. Right now, I have this perfectly stable FPS. You'll notice the drive spiked. It had to load some stuff. Didn't change my FPS at all. It doesn't seem to be really causing me any problems on this particular computer. So let me talk about one final comment here. If we look at the GPU is ready to generate frames at 8 milliseconds a frame. The CPU is at like 40. If you look at these lines on the line graph, you see just an absolute straight line on the GPU blue line. Now, there should be a red line for the CPU showing how well it's doing. But the problem is, where's the red line? I don't see it. That's because, once again, this is the final time I'm going to make this point. This is the point of this video, okay? That's our bottleneck. So the red line is overlapping with the white line of how our frames are being generated. This means that every time our frames per second is getting hurt, it's because the red CPU line, they're overlapped. So it's because our CPU is causing all of our problems. If it wasn't causing all of our problems, we would actually see the red CPU line. All right, so let's summarize this video. By the way, make sure all your drivers are updated also. Update your Windows drivers, update your NVIDIA or your AMD drivers for your graphics card. Make sure all your drivers are up to date because that can also cause problems sometimes too. Even your SSD might need its driver updated. I have to shout that out. So the summary of this video is as follows. Press F1 on your keyboard, open your performance. As you move around the world, keep an eye on the performance graph. So let's actually move around now. Let's actually move around now and see what happens, okay? As I move around, watch that white line of my frames per second and watch all the other stuff, okay? The shader and everything else is working, but at the end of the day, it's always the CPU milliseconds. The performance of the CPU is always what's hurting me every time. And look at the GPU line. The GPU line, it's just a straight flat line. So if it was only up to the GPU, I would basically be having like, I don't know, 100 FPS? Yeah, I'd be having 100 FPS right now if it was only up to the GPU. But the problem is the CPU on this computer is not up to par. It's not good enough. It's not a good match for the performance of the GPU. The GPU is way outperforming the CPU, and the CPU is bottlenecking us. And as we move around and we have all this stuff on the screen and we got all these particle effects, people bought all these fancy MTXs, which actually hurt all of our performance when you're in the town. Look at my VRAM. My VRAM is just sitting at 5 gigs. It's like, it doesn't move. You just choose your texture quality in the settings. Okay, network's fine. Memory usage, RAM, fine. Okay, shader, yeah, it activates every once in a while. You can see on the graph, the shader, the bright green, it pops up and down. It doesn't have any real effect on our FPS. The only thing that's killing us is our CPU. So now, if you really want to try to do something about this, you have to basically go through the settings and figure out which of these are actually going to affect my CPU performance to actually boost my FPS, or is it time for me to just straight up replace my CPU and just get a better one? So basically the next place to go is to search and figure out which of these settings affect my CPU. I don't think any of these are going to strongly influence the impact of the CPU on this. I think most of these are mostly geared towards your GPU performance. But since I'm not going to go through each one of these and talk about it and say what to set to what, I will go ahead and try to put in the description a link to a video, a nice video that a guy put out where he basically goes through each one of these and says to set it to the lowest setting, essentially. And he does give a little bit of talk about each different setting. I'll go ahead and put that as kind of a next step if you want to go through these. But now my hope is after you watch this video, you actually have the tools to at least understand where your bottleneck is and to try to kind of troubleshoot your particular issue that you're having. Because the funny thing is, most likely you could actually, if you're CPU bottlenecked, which I think most people are, you could actually turn some of these up potentially. You could potentially actually turn some of these up that are mostly just using your graphics card. You could actually make the quality of your game better and have the same FPS if you can't necessarily get any more FPS because you're like really hardcore CPU bottlenecked. All right, y'all, that's the end of the video. I'm gonna start making some of these performance related, hardware related videos because I have been learning a fair amount about it recently. I'm actually gonna upgrade my computer, and I'm actually gonna spend a lot of time researching what GPU I wanna get. I'm actually gonna go through different benchmarks people are putting out of how well certain GPUs and CPUs are doing. I do plan to make more videos like that on the channel. You can subscribe if you'd like. This isn't gonna be my normal content, but I am gonna make more of this. So anyways, I'll see a lot of y'all in the next video. Take care. Peace.